Thank you, Jonathan, and the panelists. The question of size came up in the last panel, and how big is Colombia? And relative to Brazil, it may not be very big, but it's still twice the size of France, the second most populous Spanish-speaking country in the world after Mexico, and has a GDP the same size as South Africa, which is a BRIC, one of the BRICs. Colombia is not a BRIC, but perhaps it qualifies for being a briquette. Speaking of heavyweights, I'd like to present Lionel Barber, the editor of the Financial Times, who has edited the paper since 2005. Lionel and I made a memorable trip to Colombia in 2009, so he has first experience of the country, and he will be moderating President Santos's speech and the Q&A afterwards. Thank you, Lionel.
Thank you, John Paul. What a pleasure it is to be here. On a personal note, I would like to say that that trip that we did to Latin America, ending in 4 days in Colombia, was truly memorable. It was my first taste of Colombia. We had a number of very important conversations in Bogota, and then we did some, I think, some deep research into the leisure industry in Cartagena at the weekend. Well, now it is my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker this morning. He is, and I don't think any of us in this audience should hold it against him, he is a former journalist. He is also a statesman, a peacemaker, who's continuing on the work of his predecessor to transform Colombia. And that's the theme of his speech today. It is my great pleasure to introduce Juan Manuel Santos Calderón, the President of Colombia.
Thank you for this nice introduction, and thank you all for being here, giving me this opportunity to address you this afternoon. And I want to thank the Financial Times and all the organizers for this event. I was a Marine in the Navy, and they taught me many things, but one of the things they taught me was, believe it or not, to play the bagpipe. And they taught me also how to sail. The significance of playing the bagpipe was that you needed to tune how you marched in the different battalions. Everybody had to march in a coordinated way and together to whatever direction the commander said. And when they teach you to sail, they teach you to identify a port of destiny, a point, and you reach it through the use of the different winds. If you don't have this port of destination, sailing becomes very difficult. I use those two lessons in my government when I was elected. That's the first, how to unite the country and to march in a coordinated way. And I borrowed from President Lincoln an example that he used and brought into the government my rivals. When I was a candidate, I had a few rivals, and I told them, why don't we all work together, united, in order to transform our country? And we negotiated how this port of destiny should look like. And we agreed, and they came into the government, and I was able to conform a broad basis in Congress, what I call governability, the ability to govern, which is fundamental if you want to make big changes. By bringing in my former rivals into the government, I have been enjoying a big majority in Congress, which has allowed us to make and approve the necessary fundamental reforms that we needed. Reforms that are starting to give high dividends. For example, we made even constitutional reforms that changed the way that we distributed our royalties in order to spread in a more even way among the regions and geared towards the more vulnerable segments of society, how the royalties would be distributed. We were able to approve a constitutional reform that included in our Constitution the concept of fiscal sustainability. What does that mean? That any ruling of the judges, any law that the Congress approves, or any action of the executive must take into account the fiscal effect. This is a major advance in our concept of fiscal responsibility. We were able to approve a law that started to repair the victims of the conflict that we have been suffering for over 50 years, and to restitute the land that many of the campesinos had lost due to the violence. I could enumerate many of the reforms that we have made, all of them very progressive reforms, more than 212 laws or constitutional reforms geared towards the objective of transforming Colombia for the better. All these reforms have some common denominators. We want to attack our unequal social conditions, attack poverty, and something which Colombia unfortunately had accumulated for many, many years, which was inequality. Colombia used to be the second most unequal country in the whole of Latin America, after Haiti, and the seventh country in the whole world in terms of inequality. We wanted to attack that very sad record, and so we put in place all these reforms in order to have a strong economy, but a more just economy. And I think this has paid off. Today it's 34 months in office. Since the 7th of August 2010 to today, it's 34 months. We have been able to decrease unemployment every single month compared to the same month the year before. As you all know, this is something remarkable in today's economy, when many people, many countries are struggling to preserve employment. We have been able to lower inflation to the lowest level in the past 70 years. We have been able to increase our resources, our revenue as a government by more than 30%, and at the same time achieve what we call fiscal equilibrium. So we virtually had our deficit disappear, and at the same time lowering our debt ratio. We have been able to project a major overhaul or improvement of our infrastructure. We have made investments that are unprecedented and are making investments for the future in a very big way. We approved a law that allows us to have what we call public-private partnership to stimulate more investment without affecting our fiscal situation. And this has had a tremendous attraction for many of the investors that are proposing these public-private partnerships. We have been able to acquire or reacquire investment grade, and in the recent months the grade that we had, or the outlook from many of the credit agencies, have been improved. So we have a quite solid economy. The fundamentals are very much in place. But that was part of the port of destiny. The other part, even more important, was the social aspect, the social indicators, how we can reduce poverty and inequality. And by focusing our public policies towards the more vulnerable parts of the society, we have been able to achieve very good results also in the social indicators. In 2 years, the last 2 years, poverty has gone down by 4.5% if you use the traditional way of measuring poverty. That means that roughly 1.7 million Colombians are now out of poverty and into the middle class, which is an unprecedented number of people joining the middle class in our country. 700,000 people have gone out of extreme poverty. And the objectives that we put ourselves for 4 years are roughly met in 2.5 years of government. But I think the most, for me, satisfactory result is that for the first time ever since we measure inequality in Colombia, we managed in the last 2 years to break a very perverse trend that we had of a growing economy, but at the same time growing inequality. And that had put us in this very sad place that I mentioned before. Well, we were able to break this trend, and together with Ecuador was #1, Colombia #2 in the whole region, we were able to start decreasing our inequality. We are now, with the Gini coefficient that we have, the latest Gini coefficient, we, thank God, are not the second most unequal country in Latin America. We're more or less in the middle now, in 2 years. That has been a dramatic improvement in that situation. I think this is a very, very important achievement, because this is one of the preconditions that we set to ourselves are necessary in order to have a sustainable high growth. inequality and doesn't allow for sustainable high growth. And the more you narrow the differences, not only between people, but between regions within Colombia, the better off you are. And the better business you do, because many of the companies that are going to Colombia tell me we're investing in Colombia because we find a high future rate of growth as consumers, because you are expanding the middle class in a very important way. So this is also very attractive from that point of view. So it has paid off, the reforms that we have put in place. As a matter of fact, the day I flew to London, the day before yesterday, Congress approved the final in the final session the treaty, the free trade agreement with the European Union, which was lacking in the Chamber of Representatives. We needed to have that instance approving the treaty, and it was approved. Now this treaty is law in Colombia, which is going to give a better set of conditions to investors, because we consider free trade agreements not only a way to facilitate trade among countries, but also they usually set a series of conditions to give investors more peace of mind. We set this port of destiny with very high objectives. One of them was to join the OECD. Why did we want to join the OECD? Because, again, this is a way to lock good policies in the long run. By being members of the OECD, you are, in a way, forced to follow the best practices around the world. We wanted to put ourselves in that type of situation in order to force us to continue to improve the quality of our public policies. And in a little over 2 years, we managed last week to get invited officially by the OECD. What does that mean? It means that in 2 years we have progressed enough from their point of view, their standards. We have progressed enough to be considered a member. We need to continue to progress in order to be a full member, and this is something which we are looking forward, because it will give us a good guide on the type of policy that we have to put in place from now on to the next 2 or 3 years. We have been also trying to consolidate the integration of the countries that we are more similar with in Latin America. This is Chile, Peru, and Mexico, through what we have called the Alliance for the Pacific. Just a couple of weeks ago, we met in Colombia, in Cali. This is a city, the south of Colombia, which is near the Pacific. We consolidated this alliance, and we have been advancing in our integration process at a very fast rate. I would say that this has been the most important integration process in the whole history of Latin America, and it's very new. These are 4 countries which are the highest performers of the whole region, with an inflation rate which is half of the average of the region. We have similar ways, similar visions of how the economy should work, how the role of private and foreign investment. We have similar visions on the role of the state in the economies, and we think this is a very attractive integration, and it has been very successful in attracting attention from all around the world. Many countries are now asking to be observers. In this meeting in Cali, we had the president of Spain there present as an observer, the Prime Minister of Canada. A few days later, Vice President Biden from the United States went to Bogota and asked to be an observer also. Other countries in the region, Costa Rica, Uruguay, Panama, are very keen on joining either as members or observers. I think there's a very attractive way to integrate these economies, which will expand our markets, because the trade between these countries is still very low. So there's a tremendous potential there to keep on growing. This is part of the policies that we have put in place: open our markets and facilitate the access of our products to the foreign foreign markets. The treaty with the European Union, the free trade agreement with the United States. It's 1 year old. It's working very well, and among the region, and we're opening up to Asia. This is a part of the world that we had, in a way, neglected. We are now very keen on being very active in that part of the world. We negotiated a free trade agreement with Korea. We are starting to negotiate already officially a free trade agreement with Japan, and we see a tremendous potential there. One of the reasons that we formed this Alliance for the Pacific was to precisely have a more dynamic relationship with that part of the world, which is growing at a faster rate than the rest of the world. And so we have been able to give results in a relatively short amount of time. 34 months is not a long time, but now we're seeing the dividends of the strategy we put in place. The challenge now is to continue and to make this sustainable in the future. And for that, we need to continue to address the challenges and the obstacles that we have by continuing with a progressive reform agenda with Congress. We have made advances, for example, in making our labor market a much better market, but we have to continue in that front. We need to make other type of reforms that will encourage and allow us to sustain the results that we have achieved so far. Of course, one of the big obstacles that we have had to really allow us to unleash the tremendous potential that the country has been a conflict that we have had for over 50 years with guerrillas, with the FARC, with the ELN. That's why I also took the decision to start negotiations with the FARC to see if we could reach some kind of agreement and end this conflict, which, as I said, has been one of the major obstacles in our growth and unleashing the potential that Colombia has. So far, we have advanced. I would say we have advanced in a rather positive way. We managed last week, a week ago, to end the first item of the agenda, which is the only item that had to do with a public policy, and that policy was the agrarian reform, or the agrarian development that we needed to put in the country. I included that item in the agenda because we had very progressive ideas of what to do with the countryside in Colombia, the rural areas, where we have the concentration of poverty and inequality much higher than the rest of the country. And what we were planning to do was not very different from what the FARC had been asking for many, many years. So I said, I think we can maybe agree on this fundamental issue, and thank God we did. So this first part of the agenda is now done with, and there's the other issues are issues such as what to do with the transitional justice, how much peace or how much justice are we going to sacrifice for the sake of peace. This is a fundamental question for any country that wants to resolve a conflict. Usually when you ask a victim, how much justice are you willing to sacrifice, they say very little. But if you ask a future victim, they say a lot. And this is one of those difficult issues that a society must decide if they want to resolve a conflict. We need to agree on what type of political participation the FARC will have in the future. How will they change their bullets? Instead of bullets, change them with votes and keep on struggling, but with votes, not with bullets. This is another issue that we are going to start discussing next week. I put deliberately the issue of drug trafficking in the agenda. Why did I do that? Because they have always said that they are not drug traffickers. They've said they tax the drug traffickers as a way to finance themselves, but that they are not drug traffickers. So I took them by the word, and I said, okay, you're not drug traffickers, let's discuss this. And you can imagine the change that the country would have if the FARC, instead of protecting drug traffickers and the crops of coca in the remote regions, then become on this side combating drug trafficking, and the drug traffickers would be a major change, not only for Colombia, but for the whole world. We are one of the biggest suppliers of cocaine in the world. This would be a major change. So we are advancing, and the question here is, if we have achieved so much with a conflict of 50 years, imagine what we could do with the country if we get rid of that obstacle, if we get rid of the conflict. And that's why I took the decision to start negotiations. It's not easy. There's some conditions that I put on the table that I'm not prepared to do away with. One of them is we keep on fighting while we talk. There's no ceasefires. They are asking for ceasefire, and I'm saying no. I want to end the conflict as soon as possible, so I keep the military pressure as strong as possible. The other condition that I put on the table is nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Why did I put this on the table? Because I use the analogy of a painter who wants to sell his picture to the buyer, but he doesn't want the buyer to see the painting half painted or 1/4 painted. He wants to have the buyer see the whole painting, because otherwise he won't appreciate it. And that's what I'm doing with the peace process. If you try to sell it by segments or by the items of the agenda, it's very easy for the enemies of the process to magnify one aspect against another. And this would be completely counterproductive I want to have the whole package and then put the package to the people, for the people to decide if they want it or not. Hopefully we would reach an agreement, and hopefully we would have a complete package, and the consequences, the positive consequences, not only for Colombia, for the whole region, would be very positive. I know it's difficult sometimes to explain to Colombians that you're fighting and talking at the same time. We have to be very clear on explaining why this is so, why the alternatives are not the best. So this is the best alternative, and hopefully we end up with an agreement which would be a tremendous benefit for my country. I think I would stop here because I know that there's an interest in having a question and answers, but what I want to say is that Colombia is doing well. The title of this conference, the New Colombia, is real. We are in a tipping point in many aspects of what we're doing. We have set very high objectives. I am accused of being too ambitious. It's an accusation that I welcome, because we have many necessities, and if you're not ambitious enough, you will not get enough results. But fortunately, we are getting results. I could enumerate many other results in many other areas, social and economic and political, but I want to stop here and allow the questions and answers. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for a fascinating description of the state of your country. It is indeed undergoing a remarkable economic transformation. Of course, so much depends on peace, reconciliation, freedom from fear. And you are rightly described as a peacemaker. Do you have any timetable for wrapping up this peace process?
Well, ASAP, as soon as possible. The sooner the better, because we're talking about thousands of lives. Every day there's a confrontation with the guerrillas, and people are being killed. So the sooner the better. I have said that hopefully this year we will end, and I think if there's the political will from the other side, we can finish the negotiations and end the conflict by the end of this year. This is what I hope, this is my objective. I don't like to put fatal deadlines, because I know this is difficult, but what I've said is hopefully by the end of this year we can, if there's the will, we can finish this negotiation.
And former President Uribe, whose administrations did a great deal to create, if you like, the conditions for these peace talks, he has been a critic. He tweets regularly. How much of that is a problem for you and reconciliation and the peace process?
Well, of course, I would prefer him to be on this side, but he chose not to be. That's his choice. I respect him. He did a lot for my country. I worked as his Minister of Defense. As you rightly say, and he created many of the conditions for me to be able to think about negotiations with the FARC. If we had not changed, for example, the correlation, the military correlation of forces, we would not be sitting down. They would not be sitting down. And I think his determination in that aspect is something that we have all to applaud and thank him. But security is not the only issue that the country has. Social advance is also, without lowering the guard in terms of security, you need to complement the security with other policies, and that's what we're trying to do. He is against the peace process. I quite frankly don't know why. Who can be against peace? Sometimes he thinks that we're going to give total amnesty to the guerrillas. This is not possible today. We are part of the Treaty of Rome. We have something called a transitional justice, which is used in these type of situations where the justice is sacrificed to a certain degree, but not completely. And as I said, where do you draw the line is a part of the negotiation. Negotiation that you have to take into account people in Colombia and international opinion. The International Penal Court, United Nations, all these elements have to be taken into account in order to strike the deal in the correct place. And this is part of the...
And that's one of the reasons you're in Europe. You're seeking support for this process.
And we have, and I must say, and I'm very thankful, we have received support from the whole world. Not only the UK, David Cameron yesterday again reiterated because he's been very supportive.
But when you say the whole world, that includes Cuba and Venezuela.
Cuba and Venezuela. They have been helping a lot. They are two of the countries that are participating. And I also only have words of thanks to them, to Norway, to Chile. They're the four countries that are helping us, but they're not mediators. They're not intermediaries. I decided that this conflict will be ended in a direct dialogue, FARC and the government.
So one last question on this, and I'm dwelling on it because we understand that so much rests on security. There is a wonderful and an inspiring story about economic and social progress in Colombia, but it does it depends on security. So my question is, do you believe that this peace process is now reached a point where whether you run for a second term, whether you win the next elections, whatever happens, the next government, whoever it is, will continue this peace process?
I wish that I could say yes, but this is something that you cannot foresee in the near future. But I hope that the peace process will be irreversible and that everybody would commit themselves, playing their part in order to reach this grand objective. I am quite confident that we will reach an agreement. The guerrillas have no alternative. Quite frankly, it's now or never. And as I say, we have been improving our military capacity a lot. During my government, in the last 34 months, they have been hit as never before. We took down their number one, their number two, 33 of their leaders, and more than almost 2,000 of their armed men have been either captured or killed. And we are continuing to do that. But any war, any conflict has to end with a negotiated solution or complete destruction, which in this case is almost impossible because of our geography, because of the circumstances.
Yes, indeed. Now, when I was in Bogota in 2009 in October, I was fortunate enough to be granted an interview with President Uribe. And one of the questions that I asked the president was, because he was certainly considering a possible third term, I said to him, if 2 terms were good enough for George Washington, why aren't they good enough for Alfonso Uribe? So in the end, he didn't run for 3 terms. So my question is, are you going to be George Washington and have 2 terms, or just John Adams with 1 term?
What I can guarantee you is that I'm not going to seek a 3rd term.
Excellent. Very good. Just one particular question about this somewhat difficult neighbor you have, but an important neighbor, Venezuela. You did elect to meet the opposition candidate who lost narrowly in the recent election. This provoked a somewhat angry response from President Maduro, who accused you of stabbing Venezuela in the back. You weren't trying to achieve that, were you? What was the purpose of this conversation?
Listen, here in Europe, even here in the UK, when I came here on an official visit, I met the Prime Minister and I met the leader of the opposition. I am a Democrat. I think this is normal to meet government and to meet opposition. It was not my intention to provoke a government which is a friendly government. We have good relations. We are very much different in many respects. We have different visions. But that's what I did with President Chavez. I invited him to sit down like you and I are sitting, and I said to him, you and I think very differently on many issues, but you are the president of Venezuela and I'm the president of Colombia. For the sake of the Venezuelans and the sake of Colombians, let's respect our differences and try to work together. And this worked very well until he died. I hope that I can continue the same relation with Mr. Maduro. As I told Mr. Chavez, you cannot pretend that I'm going to become a Bolivarian revolutionary, and I don't pretend you to become a liberal Democrat. You keep thinking like you think, I keep thinking like I think, but let's work together, because we have a very long and live frontier border, 2,200 kilometers. Many millions of Colombians live in Venezuela, and we are interdependent, so let's work together on the issues we can work together, and I hope that we can continue to do that with Venezuela.
And you mentioned in your lecture this morning the important Alliance for Progress of the Pacific, the new economies, Peru, Chile, and now Colombia being part of that.
Mexico.
And Mexico, obviously, an astonishing story and happening in Mexico right now with what the president is doing in terms of economic, social, and political reform. Do you think, looking at this important new grouping, that would observers be right to conclude that the pink tide, the Bolivarian tide in Latin America is receding?
Well, we don't want to compete. We want to strengthen ourselves as a group. Maybe in the long run, people will compare who is more successful overall. I think that the way we approach social problems, the way we approach the economy, in the long run is a better way. But only history will judge who did better. But I think we're doing better. We are the four
countries. Like history's already made its judgment.
But the indicators are there. Which countries are growing the most? Which countries have lowered their inflation? Which countries are attracting investment? Which countries are being more dynamic? But I don't want to judge what others are doing. I just want to underline what we are doing, which I think is correct path.
I have one last question before opening this to the audience, and this is a subject which you care about deeply, Mr. President, which is the question of drugs policy. And you sponsored this important Organization of American States survey and study review of drugs policy, and that's currently receiving an important airing. I believe that there's an assembly in Guatemala, and there's been a lot of comment on this report. Where do you think we are currently in the debate on drugs policy, and can you imagine a time when you might see the legal sale of some narcotics?
Well, where are we? I think we are starting to understand that what we have been doing for the last 40 years is not the best of all policies, because the results are not the best. Since this is a world problem, this is not a problem of Colombia or of Peru or the UK or the US, it's a world problem. It must be addressed by the whole world. And how do you promote change? By planting the seeds where the opinion makers get informed and start giving their opinions, and the government start taking responsibility for promoting this discussion. And that's what I'm trying to do, promote a discussion. And this study that we decided to do through the OAS, I was chairing the Summit of the Americas, and we gave the OAS a mandate, study, give a report which has two sides. One is sort of a photograph, analysis of the situation today, very objective, because strangely enough, since this is such a sensible political subject, you don't get very objective studies. They're one-sided from one part or the other. So this is, I think, the first time we have an objective, good, profound study of the situation. And the other part of the report is an exercise, very interesting exercise, made by a Canadian who was a former executive of Shell Corporation, who uses the methodology of of constructing scenarios, of putting people together of very different opinions, and they think differently on certain subject, but they get together and agree on different scenarios. And that's the exercise that they made with about 45, 50 people around the world, teachers, doctors, policemen, and they ended up with 4 scenarios about what could happen. They're not proposing, they're simply saying this could happen if this action is taken.
Your favorite scenario was what?
The favorite scenario would be between the number 1 and number 2. It's changing what we're doing right now, making it much more flexible and going step by step. But the important thing is this has to be a worldwide discussion.
Yes. So that would be a little move towards decriminalization.
Well, I think first of all, the step that the U.S. took some weeks ago is a major step. Is shifting towards a more it's more of a health problem. If you put in jail every consumer of drugs today, well, and that is in a certain way happening in the U.S. That's why the U.S. has more people in jail than the whole of Europe, only because of drugs. Violation of the codes of drug trafficking. So you have to start shifting. But again, this is a shift that the world has to make, not one country. Colombia cannot by itself. For us, it's a matter of national security. So we have to keep fighting the whole chain. Each link of the chain, we have to continue until there is a global solution.
Thank you, sir. So we have a room for just a few questions. I know there's going to be lots. So first of all, the gentleman there. Yeah. Would you like to stand up and identify yourself? Please make it a question, not a statement, or else I'll be forced to intervene presidentially.
Okay. Okay, it's fine. I just would like to, I'm Colombian. I've been living in London for a couple of years now. And I would like to ask about, what about the other economy? And by that, what I want to say is like, we've seen that Colombia is now facing a commodities boom. We are investing in natural resources. Everyone is like trying to invest in that. There is a financial markets reforms, which is good. But also we see that, for instance, the cases of Australia, Qatar, they are moving out of the commodities. They are diversifying and they are investing in education and social infrastructure. And also, we also know that Colombia is a young country where half of the population is under 28 years old. In the UK, that number is 41.
Right.
And also, about 60% of the economy is small and medium. Is the informal economy.
Good. Okay, I got the question.
I just going to finish saying this. You know, I read finance and international economics at the London School of Economics, and I went back to Colombia. I started working in an oil and gas company. Right. And then at the same time, I would create a business.
No, hold on. Excuse me, sir.
I just got to finish. Just 1 second.
Hold on. I'm actually going to be presidential. I've got your question. You're asking about diversification.
No, please, my question.
So there's a lot of people in the audience.
My question basically is, in my case, creating this business in a young country where most of the people are young, we were dropped twice in less than 1 year. No one faces, the rule of law is quite weak. Crime is quite common. Not only the guerrillas problems, and also there is.
I know. You know something. You're actually, you're abusing your time. Please sit down. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Come on, sir. Please. Yeah. All right. Okay.
The formality. You addressed a major problem we have, which is informality. We are addressing that by different laws. For the first time since 1994, the employment that we have been creating is more formal than informal employment. This is a major shift, and we know that we have to continue on this trend because part of the objectives that we have is to formalize millions and millions of Colombians that work in the informal markets.
Okay. Sir.
Buenos días, señor.
Buenos días.
I live in Bogota, by the way. We met before in Medellin. My question is that today we've heard a lot of interesting ideas about investment in Colombia, in the mining area, in the oil area, in the financial area. One of the areas which I feel Colombia can really be very upmarket in is the tourism area. And I want to know what we're doing in Colombia about getting tourism into Colombia.
You're quite right. This is one of the areas where we think we have a tremendous potential. We are investing a lot in improving tourism infrastructure. We have, for example, tax exemptions for investment in hotels. We are promoting Colombia as a point of destiny, and as a matter of fact, with the alliance, the first decision we took is to promote the 4 countries together. You're going to start seeing in CNN and in other international media promotion of tourism in the 4 countries. Colombia is a very diverse country. it's ideal for tourism, and we relatively speaking, have a small amount of tourists. We hope to have 4 million tourists this year, or by the end of next year, and we continue to grow. We hope to continue to grow because this is a type of industry without chimneys that we really want.
Thank you. Just there's a lady in the, just at the back. Yeah.
President Santos, the question is regarding visa requirements. I know that there has been some improvements in the last couple of years. Is this going to continue improving in the future, would you say?
I hope so. Part of our foreign policy has to do exactly with trying to do away with the restrictions that Colombians have had in traveling abroad. We have been able to eliminate visas for many, many countries. In the case of the US, instead of 4 years, now it's 10 years, and we are every day pushing for a better situation for the Colombians that go abroad. And of course, this is a two-way policy, making making life easier for foreigners that go to Colombia.
We've got time for one last question. I'm sorry, the gentleman in the front. Here.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, Francisco Itzain, President of Rolls-Royce for South America. And first of all, congratulations. Lots of good things I've heard today. But my question particularly is regarding Brazil. Obviously, Colombia is really spearheading with the other the other three countries together into this alliance. But I haven't heard today very much about the relationship between Colombia and Brazil. Would you care to expand on that?
Former President Lula was with me in Colombia just 2 days ago. We were speaking about exactly that point. We are trying to strengthen our relations in every way, especially economic, trade and investment. The investment of Brazilians in Colombia has increased tremendously in many areas. They are very keen. The last entrepreneur that I met before coming here was a Brazilian who was very interested in the railroad business, but for taking the coal. We have a special type of coal that Brazil needs, and they were willing to invest on the whole railway infrastructure. Trade is very small. Why? Because we don't have good infrastructure, good communications, but the potential is there. We are aware of that, and we want to facilitate much better interchange of investment. Colombian companies are also investing in Brazil. For example, the electricity distribution in Sao Paulo is a Colombian company, and there's a tremendous potential there for joint ventures and increased trade and investment both ways. Brazil has a tremendous experience with developing the rural areas. We're trying to do that in Colombia, and if we get the peace process out of the way, and there's going to be a tremendous potential in those areas where Brazil can help us a lot.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking President Santos for a brilliant speech. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you very much.